Good morning. Welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. It also goes out on the Lilydale Assembly page and YouTube channel. So you've got lots of different options for enjoying the show and many others that are part of the Lilydale radio family. So I encourage you to tune in to those throughout the week. And on my show, we focus on topics relating to spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And it's always a wonderful discussion that I have, typically with a guest that's on the show. And I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of some of the upcoming events. Lilydale Assembly, the summer season will be starting on June 21st this year. So you're going to want to make sure that you go to the lilydaleassembly.org website and get registered for the workshops and classes that you'll be interested in. And also book in to a hotel or a guest house, or get your lodging figured out and book with the medium of your choice because schedules get full. And I have some classes I just want to make sure I tell you about. You can find more information about them on my website, willawhite.com, and also my Facebook page. But on April 13th, I'll be doing a special online workshop, Connecting with Your Spiritual Support Team. So I encourage you to be part of that if you'd like to know more. And it goes well beyond spirit guides, just so you are aware of that. And my next round of mediumship development circles will be starting on April 15th. So you're going to want to join in for that as well. All right, without further ado, I would like to welcome to the show today, Tracy Murphy. Thanks for being here today, Tracy.
Thank you. Good morning. I always look forward to this.
Yes. Tracy, for those you don't know, she is a delight. And she is really standing for history of spiritualism in a very important place known as the Fox family cottage, and the history regarding that is really important. And we're going to get into that today because our topic is part of a Fox family series that we're going to be doing. And this one will be about Maggie and Katie Fox. And just so you're aware of Tracy, she is the caretaker and the historian of the Fox family property that has been developed in historic Hydesville, New York, but you're also the director at the historic Palmyra. So there's a lot of things you're doing with history locally, but especially geared towards spiritualism. And we're really grateful for that. The birth of modern spiritualism, as had been termed, started on March 31st, 1848. So you're going to hear that date today. And you can certainly do your best to educate yourself about the importance of that. And Tracy's going to get into that with us today. So thank you, Tracy. I know this is going to be a great show.
Of course.
So let's tell them, what is this? Some people have never heard of the Fox family, the Fox sisters. They have no clue about any of that. Let's start from the ground up, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the most important things that I always like to start with is definitely the history of Hydesville. How did they get there? And for me, Hydesville is a road now, unfortunately, but it does exist. And it was because of a gentleman named Dr. Henry Hyde. And he actually came to the area in 1812 and decided he was going to practice medicine. But once he got there, he realized that wasn't going to happen. And so he went to Plan B, which I just think is hilarious, and built a tavern. And with all the traffic, I know, right? All the traffic on the Erie Canal made him a very rich man. So with all that money, he started buying up the land, and then he started building houses, and people would come and rent his houses. And then very shortly after became known as Hydesville. So that to me is pretty cool. This gentleman from Vermont says, hey, this looks like a great place to kind of settle. We know that several families lived in Dr. Hyde's cottage. There was the Bell family, which is kind of why the story evolves. The Bell family lived there for a few years. They had a boarder by the name of Lucretia, who was a young girl. She went to school right up the road from the cottage. And on the weekends, she would go home. But in exchange for room and board to be able to go to school, she would stay with the Bell family. And one night, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door, and there was a peddler. And the peddler kind of did this in-home shopping. So he would come to your house and open his tin pack and be very excited about some of the things that he could sell you.
So it's like QVC in your own home.
Oh my God, absolutely. Yes. I think this is where the vacuum salesman got it from.
Probably.
Yes. Now, the story is that Mrs. Bell greeted him a little too friendly. They say as if he were an old friend or maybe an old flame. We don't really know, but I think it sparked a little jealousy in Mr. Bell. For whatever reason, they decided that night that Lucretia was going to go home. Now, it was very strange to send her home in the middle of the week when she was used to going home on the weekends and she still had school. But Mrs. Bell was insisting that she was going home. Now, it was also customary back then, if you were a peddler, people were very friendly and very nice back then and weren't so suspicious of strangers. So he was invited to stay because it was getting dark. So he was invited to spend the night, which is, I think, very interesting. And he agreed. Lucretia, getting ready to go home, asks him, hey, I know you're going into the village tomorrow. Would you stop at my father's? I really want this dress. And he was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Mrs. Bell takes Lucretia home. Well, a couple days go by and we're back to Monday again. And Mrs. Bell shows up and says, hey, Lucretia, we need you back. And she was like, oh, okay. So she goes back. And on the way back to the cottage, Mrs. Bell was bragging about all these wonderful things that she had gotten from the peddler and how sweet this was and wonderful things. And Lucretia was kind of like, whatever, I don't care. He never showed up at my father's house. I never got the dress I wanted. And now I have to go back and work for you. So I don't know if that's what she was saying, but in my mind, this
is Tracy building on the story of it.
Right.
So she admits to some embellishment.
Sulking teenager in the 1800s. That's what I would say. So they get back to the house, and it was kind of like that's when Lucretia started feeling a little bit uneasy. And they say that the noises actually started that night. At first, it sounded like tapping on the window or the door. And Mr. Bell would go and look, and there would be nothing there. It got to the point where Lucretia actually requested to go home. She didn't want to be there anymore. And so her parents came and got her. And Mr. and Mrs. Bell's health actually started to decline. And after a while, they kind of moved on. They moved out of the cottage. They moved to another village about 15 miles away, and the house was empty for a little while, but then another family moved in. They started hearing noises. They didn't stay very long, and it was 1847, December 11th, 1847 is when the Fox family moved in.
Now, just pause there. What year was it that the peddler was there? Just to give people orientation.
I'm going to take a guess and say probably like 1843, 44.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So fast forward 4 or 5 years after that. And we're in Hydesville, New York, for those people who are just jumping on right now. Mm-hmm. Hydesville, New York, back in now we're up to 1847.
Yes. So it would be December. So if you look out your window and you see snow, then we're right where we're supposed to be. It was a very long winter, they said. That year was a very long winter. But you have the Fox family moving into the cottage. John and Margaret. They actually had 7 children, and Maggie and Kate were the last of the 7. But there was a 14-year difference between David and Maggie. So there were 4 siblings before, and then Maggie and Kate. And we do know that Mr. and Mrs. Fox separated for a period of about 13, 14 years. And then they got back together because then we Maggie and Kate. So they enter the scene. And here you have these 2 young girls. They were 9 and 11, respectfully. And the first thing Mrs. Fox says when she walks into the cottage and looks around is, "This place is haunted."
Oh, that's the first statement. So she's
That's
already
her very first statement. Not what a cute little cottage. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. She walked in the door, looked around, and said, "This place is haunted." And so that kind of sets the scene.
And she said that in front of the children.
And she said it in front of her girls. Can you imagine? They were probably like, "What is she talking about?"
Now,
because you
how
didn't
many
talk
children?
about those
She
things.
had how many children? Not just the 2 girls, though. She had more children.
In total, they had 7.
Right. Okay.
So they had Leah. Oh, you're going to put me to the test.
It's okay.
Leah,
You don't have to do it all.
Elizabeth, Emily, Maria, and David.
So they were the Von Trapp family.
Pretty much, yes. Now Emily did pass in infancy. So 7 pregnancies, 6 live children.
And then she announces to the majority of her children,
Guess what?
Kids, have fun.
We're living in a haunted house. And quite honestly, they were. The noises started immediately once they moved in. And it's kind of funny because Mrs. Fox tries to explain it away. At first, she's like, "Oh, it must be like a cobbler and he's fixing shoes late into the night. It's so clear and quiet out here that, we can hear far away," because they came from Rochester where they were staying with their oldest daughter, Leah. David had kind of convinced them to move out to the country because he lived 2 miles up the road. And he really, John and Margaret wanted to be close to him. And John was going to build a house on David's land. So it just made sense to kind of move to the Fox cottage. Maggie and Kate, at first, I think, were a little apprehensive about what this noise was. They, being young girls investigating, they would try to figure it out. And it was kind of the same thing. They'd hear the noises at night, and Mr. Fox would run to the door and look. He would run to the window, nothing. No one was there. There was no explanation for these noises. So this goes on, and now we're kind of approaching March 31st, 1848. And Mrs. Fox says, "We're going to bed early," which is probably 4:00 out in the country. It's getting dark,
Before daylight savings time.
Yes, absolutely. And basically just says, if we hear any noises, you're going to ignore them because we're going to get a good night's sleep. They were really kind of getting tired and worn out because these noises were happening every single night. There are some reports that the beds were shaking, and it had gotten to the point where the girls would bring in their mattresses and sleep on the floor by their parents' bed because it just kept happening and happening, and they couldn't control it. So it's March 31st. Everybody's getting ready for bed. The girls are tucked in. Mrs. Fox says, "Nope, if you hear it, I don't want to know about it. We're ignoring it." So, think back to when you were a girl, if you had a sister or say you had a friend over and you start hearing noises and it kind of makes you giggly. And and I think that's kind of what happened. And it was actually Kate, the youngest of the 2 daughters, who said, okay, controversy again, Mr. Splitfoot. We don't know for sure if she said Mr. Splitfoot. Mr. Splitfoot back in the 1800s was a cutesy little name for the devil. They thought, when they talked about the devil, which back then you were good or bad, evil or angelic. But when they talked about the devil, they thought that it was a man, a man's torso and head with a goat's body. So they have the hooves, the split foot. See my little.
Right. Safer. Yes.
So that's now some people say she said Mrs. or Mr. Splitfoot. Some people say she didn't. In Mrs. Fox's sworn affidavit, she didn't say that. So I always say that Kate just yelled out, "Do as I do," and she clapped her hands 3 times. Mm-hmm. And it was almost an immediate 3 raps that they heard back. Now, I know me, I'd probably be under the covers and thinking, oh my gosh, what did I just do? But then Maggie said, "Do as I do." And she clapped her hands 4 times, but she didn't make any noise. No noise. And so with that, she got 4 raps immediately back. And she looked at her sister and she looked at her mother and she said, "Oh, look, Mother, they can see as well as hear," which I think Mrs. Fox just kind of went pale. So Mr. Fox comes in and he's like, "What's going on?" And Mrs. Fox says, "Oh, John, the noises have answered the children." And he's like, "Oh, nonsense. And so Mrs. Fox then says, she starts this whole rampage of questions. Is this a spirit? Or first she says, "Is this a human? Give 1 rap." And it's, excuse the pun, dead silent. Then she says, "If this is a spirit, give 2 raps." And they get 2 raps. And that just kind of starts this whole snowball of, oh my gosh, what's happening and what's going on? And the girls would ask questions and still they would get their questions answered. Every time they asked a question, it was answered correctly. They would clap 3 times, they'd get 3 claps. It was something, not only were they hearing it in the bedroom, but it was throughout the house. So, here's Mr. Fox running around the house trying to figure out, is somebody outside? Is somebody at the door? Listening on the floor, he would hear it on the table. And it was actually Kate who said, "I know what this is. Tomorrow's April Fool's Day. Somebody's trying to play a trick on us." And that's really what they thought. But then they started, right, absolutely. Because, if you live in my house, April Fool's is kind of like it's like a holiday to us. We enjoy it. So maybe it was a holiday for them. But they just realized that after a bit, I think the light bulb went on and they were like, oh my gosh, we're actually talking to something. And Mrs. Fox says to Mr. Fox, "Go get the neighbors. Maybe this is just us. Go get the neighbors and see what's going on." And so he runs out, he gets the neighbors come in, they're asking questions. Their questions are answered correctly. Things that, it definitely wasn't something the girls would know, like how old is Mr. Dusler? How old is Mr. Redman? They wouldn't know those things. And so I think everybody, once they calmed down, they were like, okay, so we're talking to a spirit. Why are you here? And then those questions we know got answered. They did figure out through their communication that it was a peddler. He was around 30 years old. He had recently been widowed. He had several children. And he basically said, I was killed here and I'm in the basement. I'm in the cellar. Well, that just sparked more interest. And so you have Mr. Fox getting some of the neighbors. They go down into the cellar. They start digging. Water fills the basement. So they have to stop. One of the neighbors was watching Maggie and Kate because she was almost convinced that they were doing this to scare everybody. But she realized that they were scared. They were like, what is going on and what have we done? And so she suggests to Mrs. Fox, why don't you take them up to David's house and they can stay there? And then the men will stay down here and we'll figure this out. Well, once they got up to David's house, the rapping noises were up there as well. It was almost like they were following Maggie and Kate. And this is how their life kind of, I don't want to say rolled out of control, because I think at some point they did take control of this. But it was that moment that I think they realized, oh my gosh, this
it kind of went viral. It was almost like
right.
It hit the newspapers and
absolutely
hit the world, as it were. And so
they say within 2 or 3 days' time, there were 500 people coming to the cottage. And for not having social media, not having telephones, that's pretty amazing. Word of mouth and newspapers. And that's actually how their sister Leah found out, was the newspaper.
Instead of her own family.
Yes. She was in Rochester. She was walking down the street and a gentleman stopped her and said, aren't you John Fox's daughter? And she said, yes, I am. And he basically, said, do you have any idea what's going on in Hydesville? And she was like, no. And this was like a month later. So this had actually been going on. And so he told her what was going on. And that's kind of when she stepped in and said, oh, well, I got to go to Hydesville and see what's happening. And she literally got on a barge and took the Erie Canal into Newark, or Arcadia back then. And from there, she got on a carriage and she said to the driver, take me to Hydesville. And he said, oh, you want to see the spook house? So it was already getting the reputation of a haunted house, the spook house. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of like, no, I'm going to see my brother. What are you talking about? Once she got up there and they told her what was going on, she went to the cottage herself. She witnessed the rapping noises. She could hear them. So, it just didn't stop because everybody went to stay with David.
Right.
I do want to add that John Fox is still building his house on David's land.
He's still trying to build a house.
He is still trying to build his house, because they don't want to rent forever, obviously. But now this has kind of sidelined everything. Margaret Fox, Mrs. Fox, decides that maybe if she separates the girls, this will stop. Maybe it's because they're together that, the spirit is pulling the power of the two of them. And so she instructs Leah to take Kate with her back to Rochester, and she does. It is very interesting that once they get back to Leah's house, the rapping noises are almost out of control. Not only are they hearing the rapping noises, and Kate is communicating with rapping noises, things are flying off the mantle at the fireplace, books are, kind of levitating, and it doesn't stop with Maggie either. It's still happening at David's house. So eventually word gets back to Mrs. Fox that, oh my gosh, this is still happening. And Leah's like, right, yes. And Leah's like, I have to move now because people are coming to the house and they want to hear and see what is going on, especially with Kate. And, I think somewhere in the story, it gets lost that these girls are only 9 and 11. Actually now probably 12 and 10, because Kate has a birthday coming up,
Mm-hmm.
and Mrs. Fox says, okay, I'm taking Maggie. We're going to go to Leah. They get up there. And I think now is when Leah has kind of formulated like, I wonder what we could do with this. And kind of asserts herself and says, I'm going to be the manager of you two. And this is what we're going to do. And it's going to be great. And puts it out there that my sisters can communicate with spirit. Do you want to communicate with a loved one who has passed? And really, Mrs. Fox was like, no, we don't want to do this. This is horrible. This is a curse that has kind of come over us. What have we done and how do we stop it? And she basically at one point tells the girls, no more. We're not doing this anymore. If you hear these noises, you're going to ignore them. We are not communicating with this spirit, because they still figured it was the peddler. So they try to ignore it. And if there's any mediums listening, when you were first coming into the realization, like, I can communicate with spirit, you're hearing voices, maybe you're seeing things. Imagine being that 9 and 11-year-old little girl, and your mom's telling you, this is crazy, don't do it. They're trying to ignore it. And the more they ignore it, the worse it gets. And I think like after a while, you're going to cave. You're going to be like, I can't take this anymore. And I think that's basically what happened. And their mother saw it. And these spirits that were coming in, because it's not just the peddler, these were other spirits who realized, oh my gosh, these girls see us. They can communicate with us. We've got a lot to say. We want them to know what's going on over here. And they just kind of give up. And it's kind of like, okay, we hear you, we see you. What do you want from us? And that just opened the floodgates. And we do know that Kate received a message very early on that these spirits were here. They were not going away. And they just wanted their loved ones to know, hey, we're here. We still see you. We still love you. We're looking out for you, which I think it's such a wonderful, like a delicate message.
Right.
And I think from then on, especially with Kate, I believe in my heart of heart, Kate was the stronger of the two sisters. I don't think Maggie's heart was ever, I don't want to say that she wasn't like really into it, but I don't think she was invested as Kate was, because I think Maggie being a little bit older with just a little more schooling, a little more direction of where she thought her life was going to go, as far as like, I'm going to get married and I'm going to, have a family, where Kate wasn't at that stage yet. She was still, as I like to see her, running in the field of wildflowers.
Right. She's a preteen.
Absolutely. And, Maggie was pretty much resigned to, this is my life. So with Kate getting more messages, I think she became a little bit stronger.
And so these girls, they had brown hair, right? And yes. Were they like average height? Would you say
they were very average,
like average girls? And
I mean, they were pretty. They weren't like strikingly beautiful, where someone on the street is going to stare at them and go, oh my gosh. Right. They were just normal, everyday children. And I think that's why Spirit kind of chose them. I think that they were humble enough that they could listen. I think they were open-minded, that they could kind of figure this out. And they were kind. And of course, you're going to want to help whenever you can.
And I think they also had a playfulness.
Absolutely. I think more Kate, though. Honestly, I mean, I really, even when I look at pictures of Maggie as a grown woman, she kind of has that face of, where Kate's got this little little smirk about her, like, I know a secret. But that's why I love them, because they were children. And then
And there were
as
other mediums. We should make mention. There were other mediums
yes,
during that time.
yes,
And even the
yes,
Davenport brothers in Buffalo
yes,
had been having, as children, and very interesting things happened to them when they were around that same ages
yes.
as Katie and Maggie, even a couple of years beforehand. But nothing
Mhm.
had hit the papers the way
Right.
Kate and Maggie Fox did. And then you had
Right.
all these people that descended on them and started testing them and physically kind of manhandling them to
Yes.
prevent any joint cracking. And, they were trying to scientifically rule things out and
Right.
being a bit rough with these
Absolutely.
routines,
And
in my
you think
opinion.
about that today versus back then, that would never happen today. I mean, I think the world is much crueler now, but it was kind of cruel back then too. Like, to have two young girls stripped in front of a bunch of men and have them touch their feet or their ankles and knees to say, "Oh yeah, look what they're doing. Look what they're doing." Um, but we know that there was no reason for it. I mean, these scientific men said, we can't find any way that they're doing this.
Now, in what way did spiritualism start to gather? Were they ever part of the fold? I guess I should say.
I think they kind of became role models for what we should or shouldn't do as far as treating people, question, like different questions. I think eventually, once they got old enough to actually speak up for themselves, I think that they were more accepted. And, when we think back to spiritualism and all the other religions that were going on in the 1800s, and a lot of the other things that were going on, you had the Civil War, you had women's rights and women voting, and it really kind of was an interesting atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And so for spiritualism to just kind of get put into the fold, and to have some of the supporters that they did, they had their Quaker friends, the Posts. They were like, hey, we believe them.
Yeah, Isaac Post, the Quaker, he wrote things down diligently. They developed an alphabet with the spirit communicator, and extensively looked into that. And I know that there were spiritualists that did converge as part of the research of this, but by and large, most of them did it more gently than some of the others. And I just want to sequence people past the 1848, and then Leah starts to manage them. And so you've got them at what ages that she's starting to manage them? They're starting to do public demonstrations of mediumship and big halls. What ages were they at that point?
So they would have been about 14 and 16. At 16 for Maggie, that was probably one of the most crucial years of her young life. They were in New York City. They were doing what they called circles. So pretty much from like 9 in the morning until 11 at night, with maybe a break for lunch, that was their life. At first it was like 25 cents, and you could go see them, and 25 cents would get you in for this circle. It was almost like a seance where everybody held hands around the table. It would be dark, and for 25 cents you could do this. But then once they got to New York City, I think it increased to about $1.50. I think Leah realized like this was a big thing. We can make some money here. Most of the time they stayed in a hotel, like a bridal suite, and they did not necessarily pay for that. It would have been like a sponsor. And for Maggie at the age of 16, that's actually when she met Dr. Kane. And Dr. Kane was in his late 20s, early 30s when he first met her. He came to one of the seances. He wanted to speak to his brother that had passed. And that's when he first saw Maggie. And he said that he was enamored by her. And pretty much the next day, he requested a private reading. And the next day, and the next day, and it just went on and on. And they kind of had this relationship. They fell in love. There was a lot of controversy, and surprisingly enough, not because of their age. That kind of blows my mind. It was basically because he had money, she didn't. He was educated, she wasn't. He was Catholic, she was a spiritualist. Never once did age come into the equation. Just saying. I think her mother was a little apprehensive.
And just to repeat that, what was the age difference?
Well, she was 16 when they first met, and he was, I would say, 29. So it's a big difference. It's a big difference. But, they didn't make a big fuss about it because, I don't know, it's just,
back then that wasn't abnormal. That was
right.
not abnormal. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Because we do know that Leah Fox was married at 14, her first husband. So there you go. But I will say
money, it would definitely be a huge difference, and education and that kind of social strata.
Yes. Yeah. So again, you're kind of taking Maggie out of, now she's, I'm in love. So that's why I don't think her heart was in it. I really think that Maggie was more of, I want to find a husband and I want to get married and I want to have a family. But you still have Kate where, this is fun. And I get to meet all these different people. And, look, they're bringing me chocolate and brand new dresses. And, there's a bottle of wine. This is great. She didn't mind it. But we know that the two of them were always stronger together. Yeah. So with the relationship with Dr. Kane and Maggie evolving to the point where he was seeing her every single day with a chaperone, I will add. Mrs. Fox did chaperone. Good. Or he would have friends chaperone. So you're really getting this relationship going. And he basically says to Maggie, I would gladly pay for your education. I would love for you to convert and become Catholic with me. This was the pressure on her.
Right.
And, after a while, she was like, okay, I'll do it. And she did convert. She was Catholic. She did go to a boarding school. He paid for all of it. And Mrs. Fox was happy with it. But while she was doing this, he was off exploring.
Right.
He was an Arctic explorer.
So people can know it's Elisha, like the one of the prophets, Elisha, Kane with a K, Kane. Yes. And he was a traveler, an Arctic explorer. He did the whole thing. He actually loved to travel in different places. So sometimes he wasn't, I'm sure he was fine with her being in boarding school because he was down in South America, or he was down at, he was up in the Arctic. It's just.
Yeah. And it wasn't like today where it takes us, like we can jump on a plane and go to these places. He was gone for years. And the last trip that he made, he was going to Havana, and then he was going out to the Arctic, and then he would come back to Havana and then back to Maggie. And it was going to take him 3 years. And she was okay with it because they were corresponding back and forth. So now she's probably about, I'm going to guess she's about 20 years old. when this is taking place. And that's a rough guesstimate because we really had to rely on newspaper articles, and there's no set diary where she says, I am 20 years old today. That would have made my job easier.
Yeah. Please keep a diary next time.
Right. Yes, please. Future reference, people, keep a diary and write the dates down.
You never know when you're going to be famous.
Exactly. Everybody can be famous. So here he is, and they're actually engaged. He does, propose, and the night before he leaves, he says to Maggie, I want to marry you today, right now, in front of your mother, your sister. They had some help in the house, and Maggie says, okay. And they have a friend. This is how easy it was. Basically, they joined hands, and someone said, Elijah, you are now married to Maggie, and Maggie, you are now married to Elijah. That was it. And he promised her mother that when he came back, he would take out an advertisement in the newspaper and he would say that they were married. And everybody was okay with it. And then he left the next day. He went on his excursion and was gone, and they wrote letters back and forth, and she went to her school again. They really say that at this point, she had been at school for about a year. Correspondence was rough. She's writing letters, he's writing letters. They're kind of crossing across the oceans. Nothing steady's coming in. And unfortunately, for her, she gets very heartsick. Her mother comes to visit her and realizes like she is really forlorn and ill and just wants him to come home. And Mrs. Fox says, I want you home. I want to be able to take care of you and watch over you. And so she withdraws her from school and brings her home to New York City. Her spirits are rallied again because she's with her sister and her mother. And, Kate is very playful and just like a breath of fresh air. And I think it's really good for Maggie to be with her.
So while she's in boarding school, while Maggie's in boarding school, is Kate doing readings still in circles? Yes. So she's doing this, and Maggie's barely doing any of that.
Maggie is not doing any of it.
Okay.
Because now she's Catholic. Now she's Catholic.
School. A lot of Catholics.
Yeah, and she's at school.
Did seances back then.
Yeah. So now Maggie's back home, and we know that Dr. Kane ends up in Havana, and he's supposed to be home within a few weeks' time. And Maggie says, I'm not waiting. I'm going to pack. I'm getting on a boat, and we're going to Havana. And her mother was like, oh, okay, let's do this. And so she's packing. She's got her bags packed. They have a destination date and all this other stuff going on. And someone walks in with a newspaper. And the headline on the newspaper says, Dr. Kane dies in Havana. And Maggie sees it, and that's it. Her heart shattered, just shattered. And
well, she was getting antsy. She knew something was up.
And I think she knew. He had been sick. I mean, you can't travel the world for 3 years and not get sick. But what had happened is he was actually bitten by a mosquito, contracted malaria, and then died. And unfortunately, it was in Havana. His body was brought back to the States, New York City, and they had huge celebrations and huge funeral processions for him. And Maggie was not a part of any of it. Mostly because of his family. They didn't want her anywhere near these celebrations because they never believed that they were together. They could not accept her. And so not only is she now brokenhearted, it's basically, you are not accepted. Here we go again. You're not accepted. You did all the stuff we asked you to do, but we don't accept you. And I think for her, she was just kind of like tossed to the wind and literally locked herself, not only inside her room, but I think inside herself.
Yeah, she was in a state of collapse of
Absolutely.
grief and
Yep.
feeling
Yeah.
all
And back
everything
then, you
pulled
know,
out from under her.
yes. And it wasn't necessarily like we would say now, oh, we think so-and-so is depressed. They said she had brain fever and all kinds of ailments. And quite honestly, you know, the thing that scares me is someone could have had her committed.
Right.
Not her sisters or her mother, but a male figure in the family her father could have come up and said, I think you need to go to hospital, and could have had her committed. That's how easy it was back then for men to have women, but that's another talk.
Another talk, yes.
Yeah. And this is how she stayed. This was not something that she got over in a few months or even a few years. This stayed with her. His family, well, he left her a small stipend, and his family refused to give it to her at first. Lawyers got involved, and she did get some money. But when that money ran out,
do you know how much money she got from that? Like,
I believe it was about $1,500.
mm-hmm.
So it was, you know, it was a huge amount back then. Mm-hmm. But when it ran out, she asked for more. When that ran out, she asked for more. And eventually the family was like, listen, we don't even like you. We're not giving you any money. We're done.
Well, they probably just thought she was a gold digger anyway, because I just looked up, right. Let's say in 1850, $1,500 would be around $60,000 today.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
And then she's like, I'll my hand out again. Like I kind of get it. I kind of get why they would.
Sure. Absolutely. She did have a few very good friends that were lawyers. And one of them said to her, hey, you know, you got these love letters over here that he wrote to you. Why don't you publish them in a book? And so she wrote to the family and said, if you don't give me the rest of my money, I'm going to publish these love letters. And I think it was just a threat. I think she never, ever meant to.
Blackmail? Uh-oh.
Yeah. And unfortunately for her, the family was like, we don't really care. You do what you want to do.
Well, I mean, it just kind of proves them right when she does that. Takes
exactly.
that action.
And so she published them. And I think the minute she did it, she hated it because it opened her up. It opened her heart and her soul. And their letters were very personal, very personal. You know, I've read them. The fact that he called her Tootie, I loved that. I mean, that's just the cutest little nickname for anybody, Tootie. But yeah, that was interesting. And unfortunately, you know, it got her nowhere. It didn't get her anywhere.
What else was in those letters other than the nickname Tootie?
There were things like, you know, he would talk to her. He talked to her in the beginning about how he didn't really care how old she was. She was delicate. She was ladylike. She had wonderful manners. You know, he was very smitten with her.
So do you think he kind of love bombed her a little bit? You know, older
I'm sure he did.
Gentleman kind of love
yes. And her. You know, I'm glad you brought that up because he did.
Yeah.
You know, as today's standards, you know, now we know what that looks like. He would do that. And then he would say, we can't be together. We can't do this. This is too hard. It's hard on you. It's hard on me. And, you know, I'm not going to come see you. Don't come and see me. But then it was, oh, but I love you. And we'll figure this out. And if you do this, it'll be better.
It's so much manipulation. I can't stand
it. Yeah. And, you know, and for her, I think in her young brain, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do whatever this man says because I love him.
Soap opera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that just kind of this
And she
whole
never really recovers from the grief, but she also
never.
had taken to, some addiction and
Yes. She starts
drinking,
drinking.
and she starts to really go very much downhill
Yeah,
throughout that experience.
absolutely.
So let's
Her
counter
mother
that
would find her.
with Kate. She doesn't have Dr. Kane love bombing her.
No.
What does she have?
So Kate was very much the dutiful daughter. She was also the family correspondent. So whenever something happened, she'd write a letter off to David and let him know what was going on. So he did know a lot of what was going on, which was good. I think they had a very good relationship.
And do you have access to those letters that she wrote to him, or is there an accumulation of that?
Yes and no. They're in the archives up in Rochester.
Okay.
Rochester, the library has a lot of letters. I have a letter that she actually wrote to Amy Post, talking about. There was just one particular day she was waiting for a seance to begin, and she was
that's
really
the Quaker,
bored.
just to remind people.
Yes,
the
Amy Post was her
the
Quaker
wife of
friend.
Isaac
Yes.
Post. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and they stayed in Rochester. And Kate was probably about 15, 16 at the time, and she wrote a letter and said, oh, it's just a boring day, and Maggie's off at school and mother's out shopping, and here I am all alone and I'm bored, and just 16-year-old stuff. And she talks about a circle they had done like the night before, and how the spirits gently passed a guitar over their heads and was strumming the strings. And it's really a sweet letter. And, oh, Amy, when are you going to visit me? And please bring your brother with you. And, it was really sweet. It's a letter that you would expect from a 16-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Kate is my absolute favorite. I think Kate was a free spirit. She very much was beyond her time. She spoke up for herself. She knew what she wanted in life. And it was all about spiritualism. She took care of her parents. When her father fell ill, he actually came to New York City to be with Mrs. Fox. Mrs. Fox, they kind of reunited in New York City. His house, he built the house. The house was gorgeous, but he lived in it, nobody else. Very sad. And two things happened to Kate. First was the death of her father. And then about 3 months later, the death of her mother. Mm-hmm. And for her, that was her core right there. It was like, okay, now what am I going to do? Because my mom's gone, my dad's gone. What do I want to do?
Yeah.
And somebody suggested to her, well, travel. Why don't you travel? You're young, go travel. And she said, you know what? I'm going to go to England because that sounds awesome. And so she travels to England, and they loved her. They loved her because spiritualism was huge. It was widely accepted. She was amazing as not only as a spiritualist, but a medium. And being over there, I think, gave her a sense of purpose and really set her on the path of where she wanted to go.
And how old approximately was she at that point when she went?
She was probably about 22-ish when she got over there.
Okay.
We know that she met her husband, her future husband, Henry, and they actually met at church. He was a spiritualist. He was also a lawyer. And he proposed very shortly after they met, and they were married. And they were married in a spiritualist church. Unfortunately, none of the Fox siblings were able to travel over to England to be there, which, okay. She had friends and family. We know that there was soft rapping in the church when she walked down the aisle, as if the spirit world was saying, this is amazing, and wow, this is so perfect for her. And here she is married now to her wonderful Henry, and she gives birth to her first son, Ferdinand. And Ferdinand had like the weirdest, longest name. It was like Ferdinand Lowenstein, blah, 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 blah. And they called him Ferdy, which I'm glad because, woo.
Yeah, shorten this up for people, right?
A few years later, she gives birth to their second son, Henry Jr. And they say that Ferdy was actually a prodigy, that at the age of 9 months, this young man stood up, this little toddler stood up, walked over to a table, picked up a pen, and wrote paragraphs in Latin.
Well, and
Quite
she's just
impressive.
saying 9 months old.
9 months old. Yes. He was a gift.
I don't know about that one.
I know.
Pull the other leg.
If they had said 2, then I would have taken 2 years old.
Maybe, yeah. 2.
But they do say that he was very sensitive. Yeah. Now, it's interesting because when they describe Henry Jr., they always say he was a sickly child. Kind of sad. A sickly child. But anyway, so Kate's living the life over there. She's got everything she could possibly want.
A supportive, loving husband and children.
Yes. Supported community of spiritualists, a church. Everybody loves her. And life goes on. She's about 40 years old and Henry dies. And Maggie is struggling. Now, Maggie had made the trip over to England a few times to see her throughout their lives. Unfortunately, she's just never gotten over this. They kind of commiserate. Maggie goes back to the States. Word gets to Kate that Maggie's not doing so well. And with Henry gone, she says, maybe it's time to go home. And she packs up the boys.
At what age did Henry pass? Do you know?
He was about 54, I think.
Wait, okay.
He was about 54. He had a bad heart from what I could find.
So he was older than Kate as well. So.
Yes, a little bit older than Kate.
Yeah.
Probably by about 10 years, give or take.
Sure.
So Kate makes her way back over. Her and Maggie are reunited. They're living together. They're doing okay. They kind of, Kate kind of talks her into, hey, let's go back to how things were and we'll do our messages again. And, because this is how I make money. Why don't you help me out? And so they start doing their messages again. Leah kind of steps into the picture for a little bit. She basically makes a claim that I say girls, but they're women, that the women aren't doing so well. And Kate's neglecting her children. And it's just like a party over there. Every night, the drinking. So
the drinking with Maggie, but not with Kate?
Both.
Katie starting to drink too because of, okay.
Yeah. And honestly, there is a time with Kate where she does, in her teen years, before she goes to England, she goes to a school where this Dr. Taylor has this Swedish cure, and it was for depression and alcoholism.
Yeah, don't mix.
But she did really well there. Yeah, spirits and spirits don't mix. No. But you think about it, if you're constantly hearing voices in your head and people are against that and you don't have a strong support group.
They hadn't ever learned control. They hadn't learned how to really fine tune those gifts.
Right. Or how to throw up the white light and block things out. And so, yeah, I could see where that happens. It's a constant barrage of not only spirit, but physical. So unfortunately, they are both drinking. The police do come. They do a home check and they see the boys are fine. Everything, they're fine. But they did notice, unfortunately, at this visit that Kate was a little inebriated. That really cut ties with Leah. They were done with her. They wanted nothing more to do with her.
Because she turned them in.
She turned them in. Yep, she made the complaint. I think her goal was to take the children. She really wanted the boys. Leah had this habit of taking other people's children and trying to raise them.
That, which brings to mind, at what point did they sever with Leah? Is that one of the reasons Kate decided to go to England? I'm wondering.
This would have
at
been
what
after
point
the
were they
boys.
out from under Leah's thumb? Because I'm just remembering back to the story you were telling us when, Maggie, Mrs. Fox says, Maggie, you need to come home with me. So it must have been at that point that Kate and Maggie were no longer under Leah.
Yeah, I don't think Kate ever had a very close relationship, because if you think about it, Leah was the oldest. She would have been in her 30s when Kate was 10 or 11 years old. Mm-hmm. So the oldest and the youngest, with all those siblings in between, there probably wasn't much interaction. And she probably saw her more as a mother figure than a sister.
Right.
Where Maggie, I think, had a little bit closer relationship with Leah. I think there was that respect there. Mm-hmm. But definitely once Leah made that claim that the boys were being abused, there was the split. They were done. And that probably would have been like around 1886.
Do you feel that the boys were being abused, though? Do you feel that they were?
No, I don't. I do not. I don't doubt that they were drinking, but I don't feel that Kate would have neglected her children.
So then what happened?
So we fast forward a little bit to 1888. Maggie is approached by a reporter, and he says, for $1,200, I will give you $1,200 if you go on stage and confess this whole big thing was a hoax. And she thinks about it for probably 10 minutes and says, okay, no problem.
Wait, what year was that? What year was that?
1888.
All right.
And it becomes known as the death blow to spiritualism.
In 1888, $1,200.
Yep.
What is it worth today? Let's see. A little... 36,500. Okay, $36,500 approximately.
Yeah. Well, when you're two women raising two young boys, you have absolutely no other income other than what people are giving you for circles and seances. That's a lot of money. And Maggie stepped on stage, and Kate was off behind the curtain, and she said, sorry, folks, but my sister and I faked it. And we did it because we wanted to scare my mom, and it worked, and things just escalated. And then my sister Leah stepped in and basically got greedy, and here we are. But notice it was Maggie, not Kate.
But you're saying Kate's behind the curtain.
Kate's behind the curtain, but she didn't stay on stage. She was standing by her sister. I think she was there to support her sister, but she didn't stand with her sister. And honestly, it didn't matter. It wouldn't have mattered. Maggie could have said that every day for 20 years and it wouldn't have mattered, because by 1888, there were hundreds of thousands of spiritualists in the United States. So it was kind of like an 80-20 split. 80% of the population said, there's no way they could have faked this. It's a whole movement. It's a religion now. There's no way. And then you had 20% going, yeah, we knew it all along. It was a big joke.
Wow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Maggie tries to recant. She tries to take it back.
How soon after her public...
Within weeks.
Within weeks, she's recanting. So she gets paid the money to say this is a hoax.
A joke.
And within weeks, does she have to pay back the money?
No. Because by then it's gone.
She spent it.
It's gone. Yeah. It goes fast. Yeah. Yeah. And they just continue living out their lives. Unfortunately, for Maggie, poor Maggie, Kate is the first to pass, and it's because she has kidney disease. And then, unfortunately, Maggie is a year later, and they say that she had heart disease. I wholeheartedly believe that she had broken heart.
Yeah.
She died from a broken heart.
And then, by then the children are adults.
Yes.
And they've carried on.
Ferdinand lives to be about 23 before he passes. I'm not sure why he passed. And then Henry, I don't even think Henry made it to 18.
Oh, so both of them have passed before Kate.
Yeah, Kate's children are gone. Yeah, so that's the end of the line for Kate. And Maggie was the end of the line for Maggie because she never had children. So, yeah.
Well,
it's just sad.
This is sad.
It is. It is very sad. And, I mean, I and to look at the two sisters, you kind of put them side by side. And Maggie, did she have a wonderful life? I don't know. Maybe it was okay. Where Kate, I think, had a more fulfilling life because she got to do what she wanted to do.
Parts, yes.
Yeah. And I think Maggie was always restrained from enjoying her life. And I don't know, I think maybe, Maggie was predisposed to depression and alcoholism. We know that John Fox was an alcoholic.
That's what I was just going to say.
That is why, with the first group of children, there's a 14-year difference because Mrs. Fox picked up and left and said, no more. You quit drinking. You get sober. You get reformed, and we'll get back together.
And he became a more temperate man.
He did. Yes.
Yes. Oh boy, what a story. And I know you have a few other things we should close soon because time's gone by so fast. You had a few show and tell items that you wanted to share with folks. So maybe we could get to just spend a few minutes on that.
Yeah.
I don't want to rush you though.
I know, right? Long story short, with the cottage, the Hydesville cottage, the cottage actually was there in Hydesville until 1916. And then there was a gentleman who actually wanted to purchase the property with the cottage on it. And the Hyde family said, no, absolutely not. And so he said, well, can I buy the house? And they said, sure, why not? Doesn't make sense. So
But people could move houses. Back then, moving houses was not a huge deal.
No, not the building I'm in was moved in 1976. So not so this gentleman took apart the building and they put it on a barge and he actually purchased it and took it to Lilydale. So it was restored and rebuilt in Lilydale, which is great. And but back in Hydesville, there were these two young girls. I did not know them because this was 1916. Right. And they rode their bikes down to the Fox cottage and they watched these gentlemen take the house apart. And those two little girls were naughty. They took a board. They took a board from the house. They took it back to their house. And I think the one little girl was so worried that she was going to get in trouble or something was going to happen to her. She wrote a note on the back of the board that it was from, I have to read it because I always forget. It says, board from Hydesville Spiritualist House. And she literally wrapped it up and stuffed it in the back of a dresser. And as she got older, the dresser traveled with her. So when she went to school, she went to college, the dresser came with her. She got married, the dresser came with her. So when she passed, which I believe she passed around 2000, they were actually neighbors of ours, and I did not know anything about this story. So her great niece and I are friends, and they were going through the dresser, and they found this wrapped up thing. And she calls me and says, Tracy, I've got something for you. And I was like, ooh, okay, cool. And she says, meet me at the Fox property. And I was like, oh, okay. So I go down there and she hands me this package. And she's like, we found this in my great aunt's drawer. We unwrapped it. We looked at it. It belongs to you. It belongs here. And I'm thinking, what could it possibly be? Well, Here it is. I want to
Can
make
y'all
sure
see
I'm
that?
holding. Oop.
It's a piece of wood from the actual house.
It is a piece of wood. It is part of the original house. It is the only thing, as far as I know, that we have that is original from the Fox cottage.
Now that's not a piece of clapboard. That's a piece from like the building timbers.
This is it would be a piece of
clapboard.
clapboard. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And you can see there's a little nail hole. It's actually square.
I am having trouble seeing it because you're like a little tiny screen to me.
Can I?
Everybody else could see it better than me.
Okay. Is that better?
Well, that's even better.
I'm kind of ghosting in and out. So
yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. So cool.
Yeah. And then, so fast forward to 2000. I don't know if it was 2000, but we started excavating the Hydesville site because we wanted to do the Memorial Park project. It was the Hydesville Memorial Park project back then, and now it's just the Memorial Park. But
that's where Schoolhouse Foundation was as well, too, right?
That is up the road. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a schoolhouse up the road.
Yes.
So we were doing some excavating. I was pretending I was an archaeologist, and my daughter was there. We were having a lot of fun. Cozy Allen was there. We were just, really enjoying, like, this is so historic. This is awesome. And I was kind of digging in the dirt, and I heard this clink, and I'm, uh-oh. What did I find? Because you're worried when you're digging. You got to be careful.
Yeah.
And I was so excited because I was in the front of where the house front would be, right by where the front door would be. Set you guys up for this. And I found a key.
A skeleton key. Do you think it was for the front door?
I believe this was for the front door. I really do. Sometimes spirit just talks in mysterious ways, and I don't know. So I've had the key ever since. And I actually have some artifacts from David's house, because David Fox's house is still up the road, and I'm friends with them, which is wonderful. I stalked them for a while. Then we became friends, which was great.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see the inside of his house because the basement hasn't changed. And a lot of the house hasn't changed, but they did renovations on their kitchen. And so they found all these cool bottles, and they found like a trunk lid in the attic. So I have all that stuff too. And I usually take it to the property with me.
And Tracy, just so you know, everyone, Tracy is going to be back on the show. This is going to be a Fox Family series. So next time she will talk about David, and maybe she'll have some of those items from the house. She'll have more stories of David being the brother of Maggie and Katie Fox. So just know there'll be more great Fox family history to come. And really appreciate it. Yes. And we're just so grateful for you coming on the show today to share this with us. I know I already see in the comments that people are going to rewatch this. So I'm sure, please like and share and follow and let people know about this. It's a fascinating history that you've been able to collect and then be able to be a good storyteller to bring that to us today. We really appreciate that. I know you, in terms of the upcoming date, March 31st, that's not going to work out for anything to happen event-wise because, hello, Easter, but you did mention that you will be there on March 30th. You want to tell people about that?
Sure. I open the property as close to the 31st as I possibly can, as long as there is no other conflict, because I do like to have that day all to ourselves, which if you are in Newark and you are in Hydesville on March 31st, I just want to throw it out there. Last year, the mayor of Newark did declare March 31st to be known as Forever Hydesville Day.
Wow.
So
Wow.
March 31st is now known as Hydesville Day, which I think is great. But I will be on the property March 30th. It's a Saturday. I will be there from noon until 5. Obviously, if there's a ton of people there, I will stay. Rain, shine, snow, hail, let's hope for a nice 70-degree day.
Yes.
But I will be there. My first talk will be at 1. So I'll give a little bit of history. And then my second one will be at 3. I may try to go live. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. If you've ever been to the property, we don't have great reception out there. And usually when I go live, 13 sheriff's vehicles will go flying by with their sirens blaring. That literally happened 2 years ago. It was embarrassing. Yeah.
They're not here for me.
It's like the first one goes by and you pause, and you're like, sorry. And then it's like, pshum, pshum, pshum. And it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Yeah, so that was fun. But yeah, I mean, we're so close to the road that, you just can't help but.
So if you're in the area and you would like to stop by, Tracy will be there that day. And there are other dates in even more warm weather that you're there at the property.
Yes.
And you do lectures about this on the regular. So just know that you can connect with Tracy in other times as well. And
I do ask, because I do work full time. And in the summer, I actually work Tuesday through Saturday. So my days at the property, I'm usually there Sundays and Mondays. I do try to go to church on Sunday. So I am usually there afternoon. And then Mondays, it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes I'm there all day. Sometimes it's the evening. But I do ask, like, if you're coming into town and you know the date, give me a week's notice or give me at least 48 or 72 hour notice to meet you there. I do get, and I appreciate everybody that comes and supports the property and the sisters and everything. But it's sometimes not feasible for me to come when somebody just gets there at like 2:15 in the afternoon and they're like, hey, I'm here, I want a tour. I would love to drop everything, but I can't.
Right. So that's the reality, folks.
A little notice goes a long way.
Absolutely.
If you know you're coming in April, let me know. Email me. I'm foxsisters1848@gmail. Find me on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Find me, email me, text me.
She's open to having
absolutely. I will go out of my way to accommodate you. But I'm
just not last minute.
Yeah, not last minute. And it's been like a gradual change over the years where I've kind of gotten away.
You have the healthy boundaries with that. So, and you have a life.
Well, I didn't in the beginning, and I think some people took advantage of it. Yeah. So I have a family, I have a husband, I have grandchildren, and that is that's the other thing. Like Wednesdays for me, that's grandbaby Wednesday. No matter how big or old they get, Wednesdays are off limits, and like my friends and people know it. So
unless she's coming on my show. So there.
Well, I don't see they have to go to school, so this worked out perfect.
Oh, it's been so great to have you here today. And as I said, she'll be back. We're trying to get that planned for the autumn so that you can enjoy more about the Fox family. And before I forget, there is next week on my show, my guest will be Patricia Bell. We're going to be talking about energy activation of the solar eclipse, like what's happening energetically that shifts during this time. And you're not going to want to miss that show. And I also forgot to mention, I am the Sunday speaker and featured medium at the Lilydale Spiritualist Church this Sunday. So if you want to come in person, it's where the Healing Temple is during the summer, but in the off season, it's the Lilydale Spiritualist Church. I will be the featured lecturer in medium this Sunday. So lots of good things to look forward to in Lilydale and in Hydesville as well. Yay. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. Let us know that you love this show. show some appreciation for Tracy and all the work that she's done throughout the years to celebrate spiritualism and the history and the Fox family. Thank you again for being here today, and take care. Bye-bye, everyone.